All Elite. Because I can't even call it wrestling anymore. Look at this clown. Look at this clown.
You were there, Tommy.
He looks. I call him a pencil neck. Look, his head and hair look like an eraser. I'm like, he literally looks like a pencil. And Tony, if your neck hurts that bad, why are you turning your head, you jackass? Oh my God.
I can cut a promo, baby. I can sit right there if you want a Dusty Rhodes promo. That's right, Daddy. I've wined and dined with kings and queens. I feasted on alley and pork and beans, Daddy, if you will. I can do an ultimate.
Ric Flair.
Woo! A little bit of flair. Look at that, man.
10 pounds of gold, baby.
Look at that belt, bro. Look at that robe, more importantly. Now that's a robe.
Yeah. Dave LaGreca, that is a robe.
Yes.
That's that crap that you have on. That
Fuck
is
Dave
a
LaGreca.
robe. Thank you. What's up, everybody?
Good evening. We are back with another live episode of Yankee Rebel Wrestlecast. I am Rebel B, and with me as always is Yankee Tommy. We will be discussing part 2 of what really happened to Chris Benoit series. And as last week we had the wrestler part of the series, now we're going to be jumping into the tragedy part of the series. And before we do get started, I do want to reiterate with our disclaimer that the use of this podcast is for informational purposes only. And we are not liable for anything that anyone will do with this information. The information and opinions given are of YRW. So we are going based off of police reports, other news outlets, and also other information that you, the listener, might not know about the Chris Benoit tragedy. So, Tommy, I know that we've done a lot of research on this over the course of the last 3 to 4 weeks, and just stuff that we knew, stuff that we don't actually know that just kind of came to light. So, Tommy, let's jump into this. And if you would like, I'm going to kind of go over the police report, so to speak, about what happened due to the investigation. And this article is from Inside Pro Wrestling, and it is actually dated June 26th of 2007. So
there you go.
Right at the time. Officials have confirmed the horrifying details in the death of Chris Benoit and his family. In a statement by a member of the Fayetteville Sheriff's Department, Mr. Benoit had sometime, possibly Friday, murdered his wife by asphyxiation. Shortly time after, the same for his son Daniel, and sometime later committed suicide by hanging himself in the basement area. The report goes on to continue to say police ruled the deaths a murder-suicide a day after discovering Benoit, his wife Nancy, and 7-year-old son Daniel dead in the family's suburban Atlanta home Monday afternoon. We are looking at this case and ruling it as a double homicide-suicide, according to Lieutenant Tom Pope of the Fayette County Sheriff's Office during an afternoon press conference outside of the Benoit house. Pope continued by saying that he relied on preliminary autopsy results from the state crime lab, laid out a roughly 24-hour timeline that began Friday with the 40-year-old wrestler killing his wife in an upstairs family room. Nancy Benoit was bound at the wrist and feet and had blood under her head and was wrapped in a towel. Fayette County District Attorney Scott Ballard described the state of her body face down on the hardwood floor as the only sign of struggle. Ballard continued saying her hands were bound together, her feet were bound together, and there was a little blood over her face, Ballard told ABC News in an interview after the press conference. The medical examiner did find bruising on the small of her back and bruising on the front of her body, consistent with being crushed upon up against the floor. And it also goes on to say that police say Benoit then asphyxiated their son early Saturday morning in his bedroom before killing himself in the basement using a cord from one of the weight machines either late Saturday or early Sunday. The boy was found face down in his bed, and there were no hand marks on his neck, while his father was found hanging from a weight machine. So, Tommy, that is the report from the Fayette County Sheriff's Office and Lieutenant Tommy Pope. Now, I know that we have got a lot of information to go through, but that was the initial statement, and a 24-hour time period. Is some of this kind of far-fetched, or what do you feel like with this information that is coming in?
Well, upon reading it and then hearing it, it just baffles me that anyone can come to a conclusion in a day about a crime of this magnitude, something that, changed the landscape of pro wrestling forever. But just in general, just as far as a case goes, how do you determine something like this within a 24-hour period? And you're able to pinpoint, yep, it was this time, and this time.
It's bizarre to me that there wasn't a deep forensic situation here. I've tried to go. I went through the autopsies, went through all of the information, and the one thing that I can't find is, did anybody brush for fingerprints? Were there any kind of deep forensic information that was given in this case?
And it doesn't look like that. From all of our research, I don't see any. Yep, Chris's fingerprints were on, X thing or whatever. Like, there's none of that one way or the other. So it's hard for me to just go off of, yep, he did it by this, and this, without really any proof as to why that is.
Well, we're going to be going deeper into it. We're going to be we're giving you the facts from the actual Fayette County Sheriff's Office, and we're also going to be going into the side of many people believe that Benoit was innocent, and we're going to go into that side of it as well, and maybe some information that you, the listener, didn't know was actually part of this case. But I do want to go over a quick quote from their son, David, from Benoit's first marriage. This was actually on the Chris Van Vliet podcast, and David said, "Conspiracy theories are just a joke. Kevin Sullivan didn't do anything. We looked into that and never had the police look into him. I didn't want to believe it. I thought someone broke into the house or some shit and did it, but apparently there was a scuffle at the door. That's what I heard." And so I'm like, okay, so again, Kevin Sullivan was never brought up in this case.
And I don't know how he wasn't, given him and Nancy were married. Chris and Nancy got together while Kevin and Nancy were married. So how can you just completely not have him involved in any part of this, or at least question him?
Yeah, there was some questioning need to be done, and again, allegedly,
right.
That's where we have to put it. I mean, we're going to go through every scenario here, guys. So again, these are alleged claims. Of course, everybody is innocent until they're proven guilty, but we're going through all the facts that we have found. And David continues on. He said that, "I thought it was a joke when I first found out. I was in Edmonton during a fundraising thing with my sister. My mom got the call from RCMP telling her to come down to Georgia. My mom told me my grandfather went down to Georgia. he was in control of it. My mom couldn't do it because she had to take care of me and my sister. He was in control of the estate and the lawyers.
Yeah.
So even David was like, I heard there was a scuffle at the door. Well, again, it's one of those information pieces that says, okay, well, if there was a scuffle at the door, who was it? What was it? Was it Chris and Nancy? Was it somebody else? That is the information that kind of remains hidden to us, is if there was a scuffle at the door, why was this not given in the initial police report?
Well, right. And I believe there was a claim, if I'm correct, that Chavo Guerrero allegedly had said on a podcast or something when they were talking about this, that when he was on the phone with Chris, he said he heard something similar. Like he heard some scuffling in the background. And if he was, on the phone with Chris, to me, that seems odd that he'd be scuffling with Nancy on the phone with Chris. I mean, on the phone with Chavo, sorry. And be able to talk, like not being a little short of breath or just not breaking any sweat. So to me, there's just a couple things that, allegedly happened during this time that just don't line up with, what we've set up to this point.
And we're going to get into some of those, not necessarily conspiracy theories, but some things about the case that was never mentioned, some things that, especially if you believe that Benoit is innocent, is going to kind of make you scratch your head. Now, granted, we are not here to determine whether Chris was innocent or guilty. We are just stating the information that we have done deep research on, and you, the listener, will have to determine for yourself after all this information is given, which side are you agreeing with? Are you agreeing that Benoit done it, which was the initial part of the investigation by the Fayette County Sheriff's Department? Or are you leaning a little bit more toward that maybe Benoit was set up a little bit with somebody being at their house, somebody that the dogs didn't bark at, things like that? And we'll get deeper into that. As I know, Tommy, you have actually seen a group on social media that's basically saying that Benoit is innocent.
Yeah, there's a fan page called Chris Benoit Fans on Facebook. That we're covering all angles here, so I wanted to get from the side if he's innocent. Some takes, and there's a post that's pinned on their Facebook page that has 32 reasons why he is innocent, and break some of them down, and they have a conclusion, obviously, that he's innocent. But throughout the show, we're gonna go over a couple points from this list that just kind of make you scratch your head and just really make you think, because obviously we want to give you guys the facts first and foremost, then kind of go over some of the forensic stuff, toxicology, everything like that. And then we're going to get into some of the conspiracy theories and things that aren't official but that have been reported, that you can take it however you want to, but we're just going to give you every little shred of information we can to give you the most accurate conclusion at the end of the day for yourselves.
Absolutely. Let's jump into some of those situations, Tommy, that you have seen on social media, and kind of give that feel of okay, maybe something else here possibly happened.
Yeah, so one of them that kind of stood out to me was apparently Chris Benoit's cell phone, the one that Chavo Guerrero said numerous times that he got a text from Chris, saying, I love you, his address, and that the dogs were in the yard, and they're locked up and you can get in. That phone is apparently missing. Can't seem to find it. Don't know where it is, which is odd because if you believe that Chris didn't do it and he's in fact innocent, that makes you be like, okay, well, if it was only the three of them isolated in that house, you would think if Chris texted, hey, Chavo, I love you, send him the address and all that stuff, that phone would be somewhere in that house, and apparently it can't be found. Another one was, there was a white cloth wrapped around, Chris's neck. And they're saying, like, if Chris was so suicidal, why would he care if his neck's bruised? Like, if you're trying to die, you're going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, who cares about a soft landing? Um, Another one being Chavo Guerrero, a close friend of Chris, apparently told WWE Magazine that he talked to Chris for a while on Friday on his house phone for about 45 minutes into the conversation. Chris told him there was someone knocking at his door and he was going to go see who it was. Shortly after Chris answered the door, there was a scuffle, and then his house phone line went dead. Chris could only be reached on a cell phone about 3 hours later, and they say this is very significant and explain why there was no forced entry because he let the killers in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are just a couple instances that kind of make you go, huh? Like, it's just things aren't adding up.
Let's also look though, because one thing we found out is that Chris was suffering from CTE, had multiple head injuries due to the flying headbutt and things like that, and that the autopsy report said that he had an increased risk of depression and cognitive impairment. So I know we had a deep discussion about CTE and the brain injuries and things that he had, the brain of an older man. And I kind of want you to
85 years
excel
old.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah. 85 years old. I believe it was Christopher Nowinski. Used to wrestle for WWE very briefly, but he's now, I believe, the head of the research team that's looking into CTE. And at the time, all of this was very new, very, like, not many people knew a whole lot about it, what CTE was. And they found out that he had severe head trauma, cognitive impairment, and that he had the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. So, I mean, okay.
Do you think that condition could have had a lot to do with it? That if you're
Absolutely, because, all right, let's argue this point. Let's say that he did it, okay?
yeah
Which is what's widely reported. It's what everyone is saying. So let's just say that, he did it, okay? Having the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient is going to severely impact the way you live your life because Alzheimer's, as you know, you forget who people are, you forget where you are, you don't know what's happening sometimes. And, like if you're in your house and you're having an episode, let's say, I mean, there's no saying what. I mean, like like you could think someone's an intruder.
yeah
You could, think, your wife of all these years and your kids are just intruders. You don't know who they are. So, I mean, that's not to be scoffed at or looked over. And it feels like, a lot of people seem to just gloss over that just
yeah
because they were dead. They announced Chris did it. So who cares about CT? He killed him. Well, that does have a severe effect on oneself. Obviously, everyone's different. Everyone may react differently, but you can't tell me that doesn't give you some insight as to where he was mentally in some capacity.
The strange thing is and this is another strange fact, is that Chris loved wrestling more than anything, and it was his life. It's what he ate, what he breathed, what he slept was professional wrestling. And the strange thing is that he was supposed to face CM Punk at Vengeance Nine of Champions
Right there, baby.
for the ECW championship and was supposed to win. And some people have disclaimed that how could he miss the opportunity to win the ECW title and miss the show completely because he was seen at SmackDown taking pictures with fans.
Right.
So it's definitely a strange scenario for somebody that loves wrestling so much, and then they go through what was said according to the Fayette County Sheriff's Department, and you miss the opportunity to face CM Punk for the ECW title, and you're going to win it.
Right. I mean, Paul Heyman said in an interview that, that night I was going to make Chris Benoit the face of ECW. He was going to have Chris lead the WWE version of ECW into a whole new stratosphere, because I believe at that point you still had, correct me if I'm wrong, you still had Kurt Angle on the roster. You had Big Show. You had some of those, more notable names, and you're going to make Chris the face of it.
Yeah, and which, of course, we know he was replaced by John Morrison.
Right.
And CM Punk started his reign as ECW champion.
Right, and, the story that obviously would have been told is, Punk was a mentee to Chris. It's well documented that Chris was a mentor to CM Punk. And that match, Punk said that match would have meant the world to me, but it never happened. So, I mean, we'll never know, what effect that could have even had on the industry. Because, Eddie and Chris's untimely deaths really shook the foundation of everything we know in the wrestling world. And, I mean, instituted the health and wellness policy and instituted all these great, things that are for the health and well-being of the superstars. So, if there's a silver lining in all of this, it's that the future generations are much more protected and cared about than previous generations. So I'll just say that. One sidebar I want to go on, since we were mentioning the WWE and all this, and I was sure they might have made, things like the health and wellness a forefront, which obviously it needs to be. But there's also a couple times they really fumbled the ball bad.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to send Jim Ross by himself? Vince didn't even show up. No one else, but they sent Jim Ross. I feel bad for him. They sent him to Nancy and Daniel's funeral, much to the Benoit family chagrin, as they called it a PR ploy to go for the company. If you really cared about these people, show up. Don't just send Jim Ross, because that, to me, that's just kind of, shades of some parts of the Owen tragedy.
Yeah.
Like WWE would rather protect themselves than to look out for the families involved. And in both instances, they neglected to do so. So I just want to put that out there too. They were doing more damage control during this whole thing than trying to be there for, Chris's older son and daughter, who his daughter is out of the limelight. I'm not going to bring her in all this, but just Chris's other two kids. Don't care about Nancy's family. We don't care about them. So it leaves a bad taste in my mouth that they just want to go around running about, trying to diffuse all the steroid rumors and make them look good rather than focusing on the families.
Yeah, and some of the conspiracy theories that are out there is there's three that goes against the grain with Chris actually doing it. And one of them is that he owed people money, which seems a little far-fetched because he was making good money in WWE.
Yeah.
Even Vince's name got brought up in some conspiracy theories, and then definitely Kevin Sullivan's name with the past history of him being married to Nancy, and that an information you found is that it was the 10-year anniversary of their divorce.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is information we're never going to know. I mean, let's face it, we're never going to know what really happened to Chris Benoit, his wife and son. But there are some more information that you have from that particular group on social media that kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit.
Yeah, and I was just looking some stuff up just to clarify. It does look like in 1997 is when they did have their divorce. So that would ping it to 10 years. So yeah, just ironic that that timing of everything is just kind of makes you scratch your head, but we will never know, unfortunately.
Now you have some more information, which you've got 32 points.
Yeah.
Let's look at a couple more of those and let the listeners be able to understand some of the things that may not be adding up with this tragedy.
Yeah, obviously Chris is a big guy, very strong. I mean, you see the traps in that
Yeah.
People magazine, and the man was shredded. Why would he have to tie Nancy up to kill her? He was a big guy. The point said he could have just, used his brute force. He didn't need the aid of any weapon or tool or anything if he wanted to kill her. So it just that makes us like, why wrap her up to then do it? It just doesn't make any sense. One that really, really had me thinking was, and this will go to the toxicology, which we'll talk about in a minute. There were 10 empty beer cans and an empty bottle of wine next to Chris's body, but yet he tested negative for alcohol.
Yeah.
Wasn't any alcohol in his system. Not even a lick of it. And then allegedly, the police kept changing the location of where Nancy's body was found. First, apparently, it was found in the downstairs family room. Second, she was found in the upstairs bedroom, and then third, she was in the house office. So there's some apparent inconsistencies that people were seeing in that. Oh, and then one you had mentioned before to me, Nancy Benoit's death was posted on the internet 14 hours before the bodies were actually
That's
found.
crazy.
Right,
Crazy.
but it gets even crazier. The person who updated the Wikipedia about her death lived a quarter of a mile from the WWE headquarters.
Wow. Wow.
Now I want to reiterate, I am not claiming anybody in WWE had anything to do with this.
Yeah.
But I do find that is a very strange coincidence that is potentially a thing.
Wow.
Also, the fact that again, as we mentioned, Chris had severe CTE, and that after his death, they looked into it. He had to bury him with 85-year-old Alzheimer's patients. Did someone take advantage of that? Did somebody know he was in a bad way, and someone close to him maybe take advantage of him? He severely hurt his head in his last match where Elijah Burke's knee hit him so painfully while doing that diving headbutt. So if, in quotes, if he did it, he clearly might not have been in the right state of mind and might not have had any idea what's going on. I mean, their claim for this is if you've seen the movie Concussions, you might understand, different grades of concussions have different symptoms and side effects. So, I mean, that diving headbutt alone jolts your body, jolts your head.
Yeah.
If you hit that wrong and you're flying, 15 feet in the air or whatever you are, and you go right into somebody's knees and you land wrong, that's going to cause some damage.
Well, he had a lot of neck problems too.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's that's another way to look at it, is the fact that his condition could have been the reason that he did what he did. I mean, it's, again, we are allegedly saying, okay, you as the listener have to make your own claim. Did Benoit do it or did he not do it? And that's why we're giving you this information, so that you, the listener, can determine what you think. We're not here to determine whether it happened or not. We're just here to give you the information that we've done deep research on, that is literally going to either solidify the fact that yes, he did it, no questions asked, or wait a minute, did you say that Nancy's death was reported on Wikipedia 14 hours before she died? Wait a minute, I didn't know that information. So it's, we are just delivering information. And again, like I said before, this information is information that we have found, deep discovery through other news outlets, other media, and everybody that we discuss is innocent till proven guilty. And again, this is informational group from YRW.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, hey, I highly encourage you guys. If you guys are live watching and you're in the chat, let us know what you think. Because we want to hear what you guys have to say. We want to know what you guys are thinking. Because this is a very polarizing topic. That we want to cover all aspects of this. And maybe you have something that we haven't even thought about yet or haven't talked about
Yeah.
yet. So I just want to do one more on this list before we move on to some of the toxicology stuff, Brian.
Yeah.
One that kind of really, again, makes you think. It's well reported. I saw it on the Dark Side of the Ring. I've seen multiple interviews about it. Chris Benoit's neighbor was the one who found the bodies. Um, and she told police about it during the wellness check. The cops asked her to control the dogs and tie them and check in the house. She took a little longer than expected and came out shouting, "Daniel's dead! Daniel's dead!" She also said, allegedly, she saw a car a few hours or a day before going out of the Benoit house. Later, she apparently fled to a different city to try to save herself from some more questioning. And then, the questions come off of that. Who was in the car that may have went out of their house? Why was this never looked into as a potential thing? I mean, sure, you may not have had obviously Ring doorbells and stuff back in 2007, but I mean, people in the Atlanta, Georgia area know where Chris Benoit's house is.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell me they don't. And if someone's coming from his residence and you're a neighbor, why, and you bring this up, why wouldn't you go more into this? And why wouldn't the police look more into this?
It sounded like that it was kind of an open shut case for them. And I just don't know if that area had the forensic capability that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very possible, but it just leads you to think when you read these. Just, man, like, did they really miss something? Or was this case just lack of resources? I don't know.
Because it sounded like it was pretty open shut.
I mean, when
within 24 hours, they had this thing figured out, and then of course it took a year to get it as a case closed situation. But I'm like, could there have been more done to really determine this?
I mean, one can argue because, like you said, when you go out in 24 hours and you say, "Yep, this is a double murder suicide," I don't want to say what they were doing, but what it comes off as is what I'll say. What it comes off as, at least to me, when you do that in 24 hours, but it takes a year for you to shut it, you got to think with a case of this magnitude, if you're willing to make that strong of an assumption, maybe you'll do what you need to do to keep it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more of a conspiracy theory, but maybe you'll do what you need to do to protect what you called 24 hours ago so you don't look silly. So, like it looks good on your resume. Hey, I figured out the Chris Benoit case. I don't know. That's just a thought I get from when I think about that.
Well, you said that you want to dive into the toxology side of it. What information do you have for the toxology report?
So, one I mentioned a little earlier that, the talk about all, he was on steroids. He was drunk and all this other stuff. Well, he did have elevated testosterone. But we had talked before the show, and I have an article. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. Maybe you can have it because I think I sent it to you, Brian. Where they were talking about, Chris was taking these pills, and I believe the pills had to do with a testicular issue that he was dealing with. I believe that was helping him in the healing process of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a steroids, HGH, anything like that. It was just elevated testosterone. He also had prescription drugs in his system. They were at the prescribable limit. So he wasn't OD'd or taking too much of one thing. Again, no alcohol in his system, but yet there was all these beer cans and bottles around him in his home gym. So again, people were banking on the toxicology reports to come through, and everyone's like, okay, well, maybe this will make some type of like not sense, but it'll bring it full circle. Like, okay, there was a lot of things involved in this, but it wasn't clean, but it came back as clean as anyone would have, could have imagined. So I feel like once that happened, everyone was kind of like, all right, we're done with this. It's just it doesn't make any sense. Let's just move on. Essentially, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's strange that he had the alcohol around him in the home gym, but he didn't have any alcohol in his system. And even if it was a couple days before they found him, it would still show in his system.
Right.
So it's again, this is a very sensitive topic that you got to look at the facts, of course, from the police side of it, and then you've got some things that just doesn't add up. Now, I know that we still have some other information that's on here. I know that you mentioned Chavo, and he was on the phone with Chris when he said somebody's at the door, and then he heard a little bit of a scuffle. He said that Chavo said that Benoit seemed worried about something, but he could not get Chris to open up and tell him why he was worried.
Yeah.
And now could CTE and the depression and all that make him paranoid? Possibly. I mean, I've seen many depressed people, have a situation of paranoia and almost to the level of like a schizophrenic type of situation. Could that CTE set up in his body? Could have been part of the issue? Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have so many head injuries, you could sit and go, I don't know what's right. I don't know what's reality, what's not anymore. Because if your brain is slowed down that much and you have the brain of an 85-year-old person, it could be kind of far-fetched of what he was seeing, what he was not seeing, and seeing how everything could be fuzzy, especially with all the head injuries that he had.
Right, and I mean it's not even an 85-year-old person, 85-year-old Alzheimer patient.
Yeah,
I mean, like that. If you can't have some like sliver of empathy in that regard, because you know hundreds of thousands of people have someone right now who has Alzheimer's, and how heartbreaking it is, those episodes where they don't know who you are, they don't know
yeah.
where they are, anything like that. Like, that's a sad situation. Like, why is it so easy to throw emotions out the door just because the police said he killed them? Like, in my opinion, my humble opinion, there's certain
Yeah.
instances where things aren't just a black and white scenario, and there is a sliver of gray area, because certain things can lead to other things. So, not that it makes the ultimate decision, whatever happened, justified. If you believe Chris did it, it it doesn't justify him in that regard at all. But it gives you insight as to where he may have been mentally, to where he might not have been himself. Like, his son David said, if that's what happened, that's not my dad. That wasn't my dad. My dad would never do that.
Yeah.
And he said that multiple times. If you listen to the Chris Van Vliet interview, he's like, "That's not my dad. My dad wouldn't do that. Like, that's not him." And I mean, Stephanie McMahon, um, I believe, was quoted as saying that there's one person she'd leave her kids with that would have been Chris. Like, there's so many stories you hear from people saying, "Yeah, Chris would be the last person that I would have ever thought would do this." So those things just kind of leave you shrugging and like, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Well, and speaking about the worried, maybe even the paranoia, I know that uh, Benoit's colleagues said that Chris began to take alternate routes to and from work and back to his house. Chris and Nancy believed that somebody was following them. Chris's friends dismissed his worries as paranoia.
Right, which, I mean, come on. You can I mean, I'm sure any one of us would do that. Like, nah, man, you're crazy. No one's following you, because nobody expects to be that scenario. Like, no one expects to
Yeah.
be what they see on TV. Like being stalked and killed. Like, nobody expects that to be them. So you could easily justify Chris's family and friends saying that to him. Nah, Chris, you're fine. Like, no one's following you. Come on.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of question marks. A lot of question marks with this, Tommy, and there one point that they also made on social media that a knife was found under Daniel's pillow in his room where he was found dead. And they said that if someone was really following the Benoit family, was it given by Chris to Daniel in order to use it in a case of emergency or self defense?
I mean,
And
one
why?
could make a
And if it
case.
was in there, why wasn't it used in the murder?
Right. Like, one could make a case. I mean, you could go like one of two ways, I feel like. You could go, you know, Chris maybe gave it to Daniel to protect from whoever they thought was following them. Or if you're on the other side of the coin, maybe Nancy gave it to Daniel because she was worried about Chris's mental state.
Yeah,
Because she
that's
didn't know
true.
what was going to happen, because you could go both ways with it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't used in the murder, so I can only think of two different scenarios to where, that knife could have been used.
Well, we also know that Chris was wanting to open his own wrestling academy,
Right.
and the T-shirts were already printed by Nancy.
Right. Why would you throw everything away, rationally speaking? Like, you're at the height of your powers. You're about to be the ECW world champion. Obviously, you're probably towards the end of your in-ring career, but I mean, you look like $1 million. You still wrestle great. Like, you could go on for another how many years, but obviously his body, and his family wanted him to stay home. So started to open up a school to train the next generation. So there's just a lot of things he had going for him that why would anyone in his position throw that away?
Well, and also we want to reiterate as well is that what happened to Nancy and Daniel is horrific.
Absolutely.
It is something that shouldn't have happened. I followed Nancy's wrestling career. I watched her just go from managing Kevin Sullivan to the Four Horsemen all the way through, and she was a great valet. Great
She was a
valet. Just
pioneer for the valet.
yeah.
I mean,
And but it's regardless of whether he did it or not, this is a horrific situation that still plagues our mind to this day.
yeah,
And will probably always plague our mind because of who Chris was, who Nancy was, and we never want to see any of our kids die. And it's one of those situations where at the end of the day, we still have to look and say this was horrific, regardless of who did it.
yeah. I mean, it's an absolutely fucked up situation to say the
It is.
least. Like
It is.
a family within a weekend is gone,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, whether you think Chris did it or Chris didn't do it, the way that the Benoit name is plagued, and the fact that the families of all involved couldn't get any support throughout the whole thing. Like they never got any help from WWE. They never got any assistance. Nothing. They just were kind of just swept under the rug with Chris. Like they were implicit in whatever happened, and it's sad. And Vince McMahon, in my opinion, and whoever was in charge at the time should be ashamed of themselves for how they acted. Absolutely ashamed of themselves because they did not
It
deserve that,
was
Daniel or Nancy.
and I know that they had the night for Chris. And they dedicated, the show to him and everything, and then they kind of retracted it once the police findings came out and kind of just erased him from history.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, I don't know how you feel about this, but those feelings that were uttered, and I believe was it on a Raw? I think it was on a Monday Night Raw. I
Yeah,
think they retracted
yeah,
on a Tuesday. Those feelings of how everyone thought of Chris, those are real. Those are 100% real. Um, and stuff like that, you can't walk stuff like that back. Well, I mean, if you wanted to really give people the time and give the cops time or whatever, then give them the time before you have a show dedication. Because if everything's still murky, you know. But they've made more questionable decisions, and so the fact that he went and backed it up, I mean, he shouldn't have said anything because I felt like the more he opened his mouth, the more he made it worse.
yeah.
You know, have the night, I get the next night, 24 hours later, it's the double murder suicide. Okay, if you want to just leave it at that and you want to just make the statement like, hey, with what's transpired, we're going to separate ourselves, whatever. But don't backtrack it because it just is messy.
It
It
is, and I
already
and I
messy
think it was a
situation.
case of let's cover our own ass because this guy was an employee of our company. We need to clean up this PR mess.
Right, and it seems like it's all they care about was the PR, not about the actual people involved. It was just
And,
about
and
covering
and
their
I get
ass.
it. I get it from a company standpoint because you have to clean things up, especially if you've got a sheriff's department that's saying, "Hey, he did this," and you got to backtrack and say, "Okay, well, we gotta kind of omit this guy from this now." But it's like everything else with history. You can't erase him from the history of WWE because he carried the company for a long time.
Yeah, I mean he was in the Attitude Era. He was in the Ruthless Agree. He was in a couple eras and was an integral part of the company for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
So, you can't just take that person completely out of history. It's kind of like, with Hulk Hogan. For a while, they erased him with his racist comments and everything.
Yeah.
They took him out of the Hall of Fame, all this stuff. It's like you can't erase somebody as one of the biggest stars in the industry. Like if you want to not talk about him, whatever, that's your prerogative. Your company, you do what you got to do. But you can't omit someone from history who meant so much to the industry and your company because the
Yeah.
fans will always remember regardless.
Yeah. What other things are you seeing that were kind of question marks?
Yeah, so a, a close friend of Chris named Biff Wellington from Canada. He was around when the divorce happened. So for those who I believe don't know, because I think that's where this is going. Nancy, I believe, had filed for divorce in 2003, but then it was withdrawn. And I believe this guy had sided with Chris in the thing. Um, he apparently died a couple days later after this whole tragedy happened.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a close friend of Chris. Um, and then most people who knew Chris personally said that again, he was the last person on earth to do something like this. He didn't just love his family; he worshipped his family, especially his younger son Daniel. His family meant the world to him. So why would he kill him? And again, Stephanie McMahon said if she wanted to have her kids with someone, like just leave them with him, it would be Chris. Nancy's sister said that Benoit's Google search history had easiest way to break someone's neck. Who would have typed that? Some people argue that it was searched by the other person who's in the house. And the way that Chris's body was found, it is said that he could not have done it alone. Like, did someone make it look like an apparent suicide? Like, did somebody kill him, place his body, and go? Because, like we said, there wasn't much forensic evidence that was collected or is even reported.
It was basically just the injuries from the autopsy.
Right. So, those are just a couple things. Let me find one more. So, to speak about Kevin Sullivan. So, apparently, there's reports that Kevin Sullivan told Chris Benoit that he'd kill him. And again, I don't know if this specific part is true, but they say that Kevin Sullivan is a high ranking member of a satanic cult. I don't know this to be
Interesting.
true, but this is what they're claiming. And
Allegedly.
yeah, and at the time, I believe it was believed he was on the board of directors. And as we know, there is motive for Kevin Sullivan to kill. Now they mentioned specifically Daniel because he was Chris and Nancy's offspring, and they never had children together, from my knowledge. Um, and Dusty Rhodes is quoted as saying he danced with the devil when working with Kevin Sullivan, who is known as being cold-hearted and conniving. And like I had said, the Benoit family was murdered on the 10-year anniversary of Nancy's divorce from Kevin. Once again, another coincidence, possibly. And then one more. Chris's father said that Chris called him on Father's Day and told him he could spend some more time with his family, but he had to work. One of Nancy's friends said that Nancy loved Chris, and at that time she didn't have any plans to leave him. So there's just a lot of things to really digest and take in that just makes you wonder if we have all these questions, if we have all these reservations, how did the people involved in this case not have the same?
That's
I
true.
mean,
That's a good
I,
point.
I mean, sure, maybe if we've had 17 years to marinate on all this information, so, but still, that goes. You can't rush cases like these, no matter if it involves a celebrity or it involves regular civilians. You can't rush cases like this. You gotta take every shred of facts and every shred of evidence into account before making that ultimate conclusion.
Absolutely. And that's where we're at with it, is the fact of, okay, it's gonna there's always going to be two sides to a tragedy like this. Do you believe what the police has said, or you believe in the information that's came out between now and the last 17 years, as investigative forensics and things of that nature has gotten to an all-time high, where we can determine things a little bit easier. Some of the things, the phone calls, the person at the door, the car leaving, that the neighbor saw. There's just a lot of question marks within this case, and there will always be question marks within this case.
Right. Um, there's so many questions we have that we can't answer because the people that know what was going on aren't here anymore. The people who are directly involved. Um, and a case like this will never be, brought back up again and gone through. I highly doubt that. So it's not like new evidence may be administered or anything like that. So it's just a sad tragedy that happened that shouldn't have happened. Like, these three people should still be alive today.
Agreed.
Um, Regardless of what was going on, no one deserves to go through this.
Absolutely. So we just got a few minutes left, Tommy, and we're actually back on a regular schedule next week with our wrestling news and everything. But this has been an amazing series. The part 1 and 2 of what really happened to Chris Benoit. We're going to leave it up to you, the listener, and determine what you believe. And from some of the things that you've been told here on this particular show today, you may have sided differently. You may be hard nosed. Yeah, he did it. That's kind of where we're leaving this at, is that it's kind of determining up to you whether you think he did it or he didn't do it and was set up with motive. So, Tommy, what else do you have for us before we end the show tonight?
So I just want everyone to take from this that whatever you believe, that is your prerogative. You know, there's many people I know that if I bring up this name, I get side eyed, I get kind of name called, and I haven't even said anything. I just bring up the name. And, the name Chris Benoit invokes emotion, whether positive or negative, it invokes some type of emotion. Whatever you feel, it's completely okay. You have the right to believe whatever you want to believe, and I'm not going to shame you for it. I can believe what I want to believe. Brian can believe what he wants to believe. We're not making cases one way or the other. We're just giving you different mindsets to think from, and maybe some evidence you haven't even heard about yet. Some
Yeah,
theories that had never crossed your mind that just make you think a little differently about it. It changes your um, opinion. Maybe it doesn't. You know, but at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do for you. And I
absolutely.
appreciate all you guys listening to this.
Absolutely. And again, we're going to do more investigative series like this that we're going to bring to the forefront. And again, we next week we have got Money in the Bank coming up. We've got a lot of really cool things that are going to be happening next week, so you need to be staying tuned. Make sure you tell people that Yankee Rebel Wrestlecast is on all of your podcast formats, and make sure that you're following and subscribing. And of course, at the end of our show tonight, you will see all of our sponsors and everything that we have. So again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight and tuning into part 2 of what really happened to Chris Benoit. And again, we want to leave you with the fact that regardless of whose fault it was, this was a horrific incident and none of them deserved what happened to them. So for Yankee Tommy, I am Rebel Brian, and we will be back next week with some more wrestling news. And you have been tuning in to Yankee Rebel Wrestlecast. We will see you next week.
Adios, everybody.